G'day folks, welcome to this this overview and kind of example of play for Napoleon's Imperium. This was published last year by Compass Games. It's a designed by another Aussie, Andrew Rowland. This is a 1 to 8 player grand strategic game focused on the Napoleonic Wars. I did an unboxing of this last year and I kind of covered some of the details. And I said back then that when I had this all set up, I would tell you more about it. So here we are. This is the starting setup, and what we effectively have here are two teams. This is primarily a team-based game. You'll have the French and their allies. This is France, the Ottoman Empire, the Spanish Empire, and the Austrian Empire, versus the British and their allies, and that is Britain, the Nordic nations, the Prussian Empire, and the Russian Empire. Now, a lot of people have said, what are the Austrians doing with the French? This seems very ahistorical. The first thing to keep in mind is that this is a relatively light treatment of the Napoleonic Wars. It is not a sort of an intense historical simulation. It is a game that has been designed for fun, enjoyable, interactive and engaging team play. So yes, it's a team-based game. French allies versus the British and their allies. 4 versus 4. Ideally, you're playing with a full complement of 8 players, but in anything less than that, you'll have one person playing 2 nations. You can play it solitaire, 8 nations all going on at once, as I'm doing right now. You can play 2-player, French and their allies versus British and their allies. 3-player, you might give one person Britain and the Nordic nations, the other person Prussia and the Russian Empire versus the French. You can modify this based on the number of players you have at the table. So this is the starting setup, and in fact I'm a little more advanced of the starting setup. I started to play this and I thought, oh, actually I'll stop and I'll show everyone sort of what's going on here. So this is 1788, when you set up a game and when you organise a game with friends, you basically organise a time limit. So you might say, we're going to have a short game, we'll just play for 4 years through to 1801, and at the end of 1801 you stop, you add up the battle points that your team has accumulated, and the team with the most battle points wins that game, in effect. There are some great rules in here for sort of legacy game where you can keep track of everyone's score and return to it. So it's one of those kind of a game that you can keep coming back to. The rules are, there's quite a hefty rule book. I highlight this in the unboxing. It's quite a hefty rule book of 39 pages, but the core rules are relatively straightforward. This is not a difficult or complex game. It's designed to be accessible. And you could even get, what I like about this is you can even get some non-gamers playing with this. It's the kind of game that you set up on the table and you set up dinner on the side and you kind of have this big Napoleonic gaming evening. So yeah, everyone controls a different sort of empire or faction. You set everything up on the board. This is how most factions are set up. The only thing I've really done at the start is I've purchased French units. So you can see off to the side, you can actually see them, they're off camera, but off to the side we have French purchases in their box down there, in this little blue box down here. That's the only thing I've pretty much done, and I did French movement. Now 1801 is a peace turn, which means there's no combat on this turn. This is pretty much a turn of posturing where a game, when you're playing with multiple players, everyone does this first turn simultaneously. You do your pre-movement purchases, you spend basically, you have an allowance each turn, income basically, and you spend your income to purchase new units. So the French have done that, they've put them off to the side. On the first turn, everyone will do this simultaneously. So everyone will be thinking about their strategies, what units they want to purchase to employ those strategies. The French have, I'll show you what they've bought. They've bought a lot of infantry, and some artillery. Why did I buy these particular units? Well, the French get an artillery benefit, and so their artillery is slightly stronger than the norm, and infantry is cheap. So I bought a fair bit of infantry, 4 4 infantry, sorry, which only costs 8 of my income, and then 3 artillery, which costs 9, for a total of 17, which equals French income. You have to spend basically your income to its full. You don't save points, income, money from turn to turn. So the French have spent up their income, and they're ready to place those units. Your income is based on territories you control. So see here the 2, the 3, the 2, these are neutral sort of states at the start of the game. You basically add up the points for all the states you control, the areas you control, and that's your income. So as you take over neutral territories, you gain income. As you take over enemy territories, you gain income, and your opponents lose income. And that's really the core of the game. Building up your economic, your income at the expense of your opponents, and then using your additional income to purchase better units, and hopefully your opponents won't be able to purchase as many. You're trying to get that edge over your opponents. I mentioned that at the end of your set time limit, you add up your battle points, and that determines which team has won. There's also a way you could end the game earlier by capturing enemy capitals. If you capture 3 enemy capitals and hold them for a full year, you win the game. The rules say that that's unlikely, but it's really designed to force people to defend their capitals, and just in case one side is really dominating and that happens, the game ends and a victory is declared. So as I said, first turn, you're purchasing units, you're placing them, you'll do a non-combat movement, and this all happens simultaneously. Because there's no combat on this first turn, it's a peace turn, all this stuff can happen at the same time. I can't, I don't have 8 hands, I can't do all this simultaneously, so I've basically been doing it, started to do it one at a time. I'm going to do France, Britain, the Ottomans, Nords, and so forth, but trying to imagine this happening simultaneously. The French have their strategy, and I'll talk about that. So the French and their allies, their plan here for this game that I'm playing is to focus everything on Prussia. You can see Prussia in the centre here. They've discussed this. I'm playing this solitaire, but in internal dialogue here, I've said, okay, let's all converge on Prussia as much as is practical, and maybe harass Russia out in the east. So we're going to try to focus on Central Europe here. The French have moved non-combat movement here up into northern France, and they're going to come and shift across maybe through the Low Countries, but try and remove that Prussian threat in Central Europe. The Ottomans will help distract the Russians. They're going to try and take that on. That's their plan. And they're doing that through infantry, cavalry, artillery. They're going to maximise their land resources, and their kind of land-oriented strengths as much as is practical. The Ottomans have camels, so they'll utilise them to attack Russia and try and distract Russia, try and put this threaten Russia, particularly from the east over here. They can come through the Caucasus, they can reach Moscow fairly easily, coming along this right flank here, swinging around with their fast-moving camels. Most units, if I can sort of show you a typical Ottoman artillery piece, it has a movement of 1, that's where we have to focus, but it has a movement of 1, M1 down the bottom left corner. Ottoman camels, however, this unit here, they have an M3, they can move 3 spaces. What this means is that they can do an attack movement. If they win that combat, they can keep moving. If they win that next combat, they can keep moving. And what this potentially means, there's an example in the rulebook of this, is that they can, in theory, all going well, they can potentially battle their way to Moscow within 1 year, in effect, within 1 turn. They have to do very well in combat, they have to have enough camels to win those combats on the way, but yeah, they can do a lot with their camels. And that's a special quirk of the Ottomans. They have these camels moving up to 3 spaces. They only cost 2.5 income points to purchase, so I think that's going to be their focus. The Spanish are going to be trying to contain the British in Portugal, basically. There's a bit of a British presence out here that the Spanish are going to try to focus on, whilst protecting the French flank as well. They might be concerned with that. How are the British going to respond to this? Well, the British, in particular the British Empire, the red units on the board, they have a huge naval force at start. They've got 5 fleets around the British Isles, and their thinking is to build this up and dominate the seas. The British advantage is in their fleet capture rate. So basically when there's a naval battle, if the British win this naval battle, they can capture enemy fleets, and they're the best at capturing enemy fleets. They capture enemy fleets on a D10 roll of 3 or less. And the more fleets they have, the more die they roll in these capture attempts. Basically, for every set of 5 fleets, they roll a dice. If they can get, say, 6 fleets, for example, in a battle, they'll roll 2 dice, and that's a miss. They don't capture anything. But on a 3 or less, there we go, they've captured an enemy fleet. And that's what they're going to strive to do. They're going to strive to dominate the seas, basically, and use their naval supremacy to be flexible with the movement of their armies, maybe try to hold on to Portugal and Gibraltar if they can, and maybe even threaten France. Yeah, they don't know what the French are doing. They don't know necessarily that the French are going for Prussia, but that's their starting plan. Russia and Prussia are going to try to take care of Austria out here in the east. That's their plan. Again, using their naval forces, this pocket of relatively weak Austrian forces, and they'll take care of them. So what else are we looking at here? So I've spoken about the strategies. What are we looking at this starting setup? What you see, every colour is a different sort of faction. Red, Britain; blue, France. The Ottomans are yellow. They go third in turn order. Nordic nations, they're combined in this faction. They're purple. The Spanish Empire is light green over here. Then we go the Prussian Empire, black in the centre there, part of the British Empire team. The Austrian Empire, as I said, allied with France for the purposes of this game, or on that French team at least. They're white in the centre, and then the Russian Empire, they're green. Setup sort of places all these units on the board, so most games will start like this unless you're doing a special setup or scenario. You have infantry, cavalry, and artillery. And the distinction between these 3 core units is subtle. It's movement, attack strength, and defense strength, basically. That's how these units differ. So infantry has a base movement of 1. They have a base attack strength of 4, and a base defense strength of 5. You can see where do we have a typical? Here we go. The typical Ottoman infantry. Attack 4, defense 5, movement 1. What this means is they move 1 space to adjacent area. When they're attacking, they need to roll a 4 or less on a D10. Simple as that. That's a miss. 0s are 10s. When they're defending against an Austrian attack, well, they wouldn't be attacked by the Austrians. When they're defending against a Russian attack, they defend on a 4 or less. So they've scored a hit when defending. Okay, that's the fundamentals of combat and gameplay. Cavalry is slightly different. They typically have a movement rate of 2. They have a typical attack strength of 6 and a typical defense strength of 5. So cavalry are typically better on the attack. Now you'll notice I'm saying typically here. I'll get to that in a moment because there are differences. This is kind of an asynchronous game. Every faction is a little bit different. There are quirks in the nature of their units, their specialties, and I mentioned the Ottoman cardinals, British naval superiority, all these things which I'll talk about in a moment, which really makes this a fascinating game. Artillery is slow, movement of 1, and it typically has an attack strength of 7 and a defense strength of 6. So good in attack and defense, but artillery is far more expensive. An infantry unit typically costs 2 for most units. Cavalry, a little bit better, typically costs 3 for most units. And artillery typically costs 4 for most units. Now you also have fleets, and fleets typically cost 8. And there are naval battles as well. Again, the British have an advantage here. The British fleets attack with a strength of 8, defend with a strength of 7. For most factions, they have an attack and a defense strength of 6. So the British have quite a big superiority at sea. And this hence the British strategy to dominate the seas with the red units here, the British Empire. It's different from the Russians who don't have much of a fleet, I say, compared to the British at least. The Prussians, of course, have virtually nothing. Nords have a little bit of a fleet, but yeah, the British, the Reds will be trying to build up their fleet. And these nations want to play to their strengths. The empires want to play to their strengths. So the French have this advantage in cheaper artillery, stronger cavalry. So they want to build cavalry and artillery, which is kind of, you can see they've built 3 artillery pieces here to really dominate. Big, hard-hitting artillery, hitting on an 8. Again, just showing you that French artillery, attack strength of 8. They want to be aggressive with their artillery attack and cause as much damage. The British, of course, have their stronger fleets. They want to maximise their strength in that regard. They've got special rifles units. The Ottomans have their camels. There are sometimes disadvantages as well. So the Ottoman Empire, their navies have a lower carrying capacity, a laden capacity. Movement. The British have a higher movement rate, not a capacity, movement rates. And it varies with every different nation. They have slightly different attack strengths, defense strengths, sometimes movement rates, and sometimes costs to purchase these things. So the Ottomans and the Nordic nations both get slightly cheaper fleets. The Russians have to pay more for their fleets. They cost 9 compared to 8 for many other nations. So all these little distinguishing features create this asynchronous situation where some empires are better at things than others. Once, as I said, first turn is a peace turn. You do this non-combat movement. You've got, so in terms of what we're looking at here, you've got every area. You've got areas broken up all over the board. Huge map of Europe. Again, this is quite a big, to give you a sense of scale. This is the sort of box lid here. So it's a huge 2 massive maps. There's a lot of sort of administrative stuff going on the outside. I've got the weather chart off to the left over here. There are stacks of these battle point cards, which I can't quite cover. I spoke about this in the unboxing. Below the map, so just down here, I have all the player faction boards lined up for a solitaire game. If this were a team game, you'd have one faction down here, or people would be sitting sort of Spanish over here, the French here. You have everyone sitting around the table. Solitaire, I've just kind of line them up in turn order, so I can more easily go France, Britain, the Ottomans, the Nordic nations, Spanish Empire, Prussia, and so forth. Okay, again, what are we looking at? So broke up into territories. Each territory, many of them at the start of play, those occupied by an empire, have starting forces. So we have, let's say here in the Ottoman Empire, we have 2 counters of infantry, 2 counters of artillery. We have an Ottoman flag to show that it's an Ottoman territory. This is important for occupation. And we have an Ottoman cavalry unit. Okay, a single blank unit like this represents 1 unit. An orange bordered unit like that represents 2 units. And a blue bordered unit, such as we can see elsewhere on the board, trying to find an example, but I can't see any right now, that represents 5 units. So what we have here is in effect 3 Ottoman infantry, 3 Ottoman artillery, and 2 Ottoman cavalry, showing that the Ottomans own this area. Okay, you divide your forces in an area into stacks so you can clearly see the different units that are present. We've also got our major commanders here. Commanders play a key role. They can help with attack, help with defense, or help with movement, and they bolster that role basically by 1. So they increase the attack strength of a type of unit by 1, or the defense of a type of unit by 1, or the movement rate by 1. Every faction has 1 major commander, which they start off within their capital, and they can acquire additional minor commanders. Here are the Spanish minor commanders, which fulfill a similar role minus the movement bonus for capturing enemy capitals. So if the French or the Austrians can capture the Prussian capital, they will gain an additional minor commander. So, first turn, peace turn, from 1799 we'll have war breaks out, and these factions will start attacking. I can tell you now, the French and the Austrians are going to attack the Prussians. They need to do a special combat move. So there's 2 types of movement phases. There's you have income first, where you purchase your units, then you do the attack movement phase. This is where you're moving to attack enemy forces. French will be attacking the Prussians. Combat will be resolved. What you do basically is you roll. There's buckets of dice in this game. The game comes with we've got here about 20 d10s. Here we are, bucket of dice. You roll a number of dice equal to the number of, we start with infantry, say, number of attacking infantry. Let's say the French have 4. They're looking to get, what are the French trying to get on attack for their infantry? 5 or less. So there's 1 hit. Then they shift to their cavalry. They've got a lot of cavalry in this battle. They roll 5 dice looking for 7 or less. 1, 2, 3, 4 more hits. It's a 5 in total. And then they deal with their artillery and so forth. And the defender gets their chance before they take any losses. And you repeat until there is only one side left in the space. So this is brutal. Combat is brutal in this game. If you're attacking someone, there will only be one survivor. Sorry, that's a big bang on the table. There will only be one survivor in this battle. And you want it to be you if you're attacking. So you want to be bringing sufficient forces to bear. The defender, they just sit there and they roll and they try to survive. So having a solid defense strength is really important. You want to have those strong frontiers. You want to be prepared for an invasion. The Prussians, they want to be ready for the French when they arrive, because again, you can't sort of reinforce this combat. The only thing they can do is respond in their turn. So if the French attack, let's say they capture this area here, the Prussians are coming later in the turn, so they'll be able to respond on their turn. And of course, they'll be followed immediately by the Austrians. So all this kind of turn order is going to be pretty important in terms of attacking and responding and counterattacking and so forth. Okay, so when combat is resolved, let's say the French invade Prussia and they capture this space. They gain that Prussian flag. It counts as battle points. The Prussians get a combat card. A battle card as a consolation. I say consolation. Sometimes it can be bad. So, okay, let's say hypothetically, because the French cards are right next to me over here. Let's say the French attack, the Prussians defend, and they successfully defend their area and they kick the French out. They wipe the French army out of Prussia. Well, for a start, because it's a successful land defense, the Prussians get a successful land defense card, which gives them 10 battle points for their team, and their team goes, "Hooray, well done, Prussia." The French draw a battle card as consolation. These are wonderful cards. They're kind of historical theme. Josephine's Garden. Napoleon and Josephine are fascinated with Terra Australis and approve Nicolas Bardin's explorative voyage to gather plants, blah, blah, blah. One fleet is removed to the purchase tray. So basically it takes a fleet out of action. It's just kind of a side consequence of the battle. Friendly fire. Confusion in battle leads you to mistakenly firing on your ally who retaliates. -1 artillery and -1 closest ally artillery. So they're really kind of chaotic, random, interesting events. Napoleon's coronation, +1 infantry to the purchase tray. Sometimes they're good. -1 infantry from enemy territory, desertion. Napoleon abdicates, commander to the purchase tray. Sometimes there's disaster. The Battle of Waterloo, -4 units from any territory and commander is removed to your purchase tray. The victor receives a captured commander card. Okay, so I touched on these commanders earlier. If you manage to capture an enemy commander, you get a captured commander card. And you roll a die, and this is if the commander is in a battle where the armies are wiped out. Captured commander card, they can be imprisoned or paroled, slightly different effects. Basically, they're taken out of action for a short period and they can return later on. What else? Okay, so control of territories is important. They're worth battle points. They're worth income. They let you purchase basically more income. The more territory you control, the more income you get. The more units you can buy, and the better you can wage war. The British are an island nation, so they'll need to use their fleets to carry troops over to, well, if they want to wage war in Central Europe, they will need to carry troops over using their fleets. So you can transport troops across the seas. You can blockade enemy forts. And this is another thing the British would want to do. They'll be wanting to shut down the French naval capacity. The French don't have a strong navy adjacent to the Atlantic, the North Sea. So the British will be wanting to shut them down, if not eliminate them entirely. Let's get rid of that French fleet early in the game and blockade those sea zones, stop the French from rebuilding into those ports. Okay, so battle combat battle cards. There are also, I mean, if you also capture an enemy capital, you get a captured capital battle card worth 30 battle points for your team, and your team goes, woohoo, even better. There are naval battles, and you get sea victory cards as well. Yeah, and as I mentioned, battle points for capturing those enemy flags, and you've got a whole stack. These sides have massive stacks of flags to be able to capture and recapture and expand and recapture, and yeah, you can go back and forth quite a lot. That is pretty much, in a short period, I've covered the fundamentals of gameplay. Purchasing units, placing units in your tray, in your purchase tray, conducting your combat movement, conducting combat, then you conduct non-combat movement after that. This could be relocating your forces, moving them around, still using their movement rates, so they don't have to suddenly teleport. And then you place your purchased units on the board, which the French may be about to do. And then repeat. And you work with your team, and you try to capture those enemy flags, you try to capture the enemy commanders, you try to accumulate as many battle points for your team as possible. Pretty soon in this game, the Prussians are going to have to beg the Nordic nations, the Russian Empire and the British Empire for help, because I suspect they're going to be in trouble because the French are focusing so much effort on this Central European theatre. They're going to need the British to intervene and say, hey, how about you guys launch an invasion of France? Hey, Russia, how about you put more pressure on Austria? And what the heck are the Nordic nations doing all the way up there? Can you please come and help me? I really need help. And yes, the French and Austrians are hoping they can give kind of a bit of a knockout blow to Austria before they can get that help. What else? Look, there are rules for invasions. I mentioned the battle cards. A lot of really special events on those battle cards are really fascinating to read through. There are treaties that come out through some of these. Let me try and find a treaty. Can't find, but yeah, treaties come out and effectively forces, or may force these factions not to attack each other, forcing a sort of peace. In addition to all those rules, there are a series of optional advanced rules for spies and spy activities and weather effects, which freeze fleets and things like that. And of course, as I said, the kind of legacy campaign rules that mean that you can kind of keep a record of your gameplay and who won and how many points were scored, and you can that will affect the next game you play. So yeah, hopefully this gives you a greater sense. I probably repeated a bit of what I said in the unboxing, but as I said, I wanted to kind of demonstrate how amazing this looks when it's all set up, and to give a more detailed sense of gameplay. As I said, I'm just at the very start. I thought I'll stop and share everything that's going on. I can tell you the British haven't made any purchases yet, but they'll be buying some fleets. Nordic nations might also buy some fleets to help with that strategy. And the Prussians are saying, hey, how about you purchase some units and help me out in Central Europe here? Yeah, so folks, there you go. That's Napoleon's Imperium by Compass Game, just published last year. It is, as I said, a relatively light game. Big rulebook, but the core rules are relatively light, easy to grasp. Yeah, check it out if it's of interest, and thanks for watching.